Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fandomology, where fandoms collide. And I'm sorry I'm late, first off. I was at mom and dad's house practicing music, and I kind of lost track of time. So we're here now, and that's all that matters. So, y'all see the title of this stream. And the title's only temporary, by the way. Once I reveal what's going on, I'm going to change it so that people who know in the future can come see what's going on. But I told you guys in the title that we are going to attempt tonight a new type of content that we have not tried in the channel before. and we'll quick. Phil says, "Who's we?" Okay, me. I'm going to try something new. And Trent says, "Am I going into the VC?" No, not this time. I'm riding solo on this one. But real quick, with that title, I do want to mention that even though I said this is a new type of content, that's only half true. See, if you go back to the very, very beginning of this channel, back when we were at least attempting to be a full-time Star Wars and only Star Wars type channel, when we did the Sunday live streams, I would oftentimes do a sort of pre-show where I would do some music and then I would do something else. I would basically do a live reading of a book. At the time, it was the William Shakespeare's rendition of Star Wars A New Hope, which I do still have, by the way, and I'll get back to that at some point. That's basically what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to get back into the concept of live book reading. So, like I said, we've done this before, but never have I devoted an entire stream to that. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So let me finish spreading the YouTube link around to all the different Discords that I'm in, and we will get started with that. So the way this is going to work, excuse me, the way this is going to work is I'm going to try and devote at least one stream a week to doing this. And there's multiple reasons why I'm doing this. Number one, I want to get my reading habits back up. I'll be honest, I am guilty, like so many are, of relying too much on looking at a screen, and I want to get back into reading an actual book. Not just like a digital book on my phone or listening to an audiobook. No, I mean like old school turning pages and all that. Number two, I don't see other people. I don't see any other type of YouTuber reading a book live for their audience. So this could be something that I am pioneering. I don't know. But anyways, we're going to get started with that. And we're going to start with a book that I have never read before, but I've heard a lot of stuff about it. Phil McCracken says, by the way, I like to say that you have nice fluffy pillows. Thank you, Phil. And he says, keep Cash Money fired. Cash Money was never fired. Excuse me. So the book we're going to be reading, and we're probably not going to get this all done in one sitting, although I'd certainly like to. But the book we're going to be reading is a very old Star Wars book called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Now, I got this on loan from one of my friends at work who is our IT manager. And for those that are not familiar, Splinter of the Mind's Eye is one of the first, if not possibly the first. No, it's not the first. Take that back. But it is one of the earliest examples of a Star Wars EU book. The only book that I know of that came before this was the first novelization of A New Hope. In fact, my friend got this secondhand from someone who got it for Christmas way back in 1978. So this is like one of the earliest printings of this book too. So we're going to read this. I've never read this before. And so this is simultaneously a reading story and a reaction. Um, so this is going to be very interesting. And of course, I'm not just going to read it straight through. I'm going to I'm going to jump in with my own commentary at pretty much any random time here. And I would encourage you guys, of course, to leave your own commentary that I'll read, at different points of the story. So before we start reading, I'm going to real quick change the stream. We're going to retitle this so that everyone knows what's going on. All right. And Darren says is take it one chapter at a time. We'll see what happens. I have no goal of how far we're going to get into this tonight. So, we're just going to go, and I'm going to go till I can't go anymore. All right. Splinter of the Mind's Eye. In fact, hold on. I'm going to really quick change the title of the stream one more time. I just thought of something really cool. We're going to call this series Paul's Bedtime Stories because it's usually night when I stream, so it makes sense. All right, that should have changed. There we go. All right, here we go. Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Alan Dean Foster, based on the characters and situations created by George Lucas. Chapter 1. And of course, the book doesn't say it, but I will. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. How beautiful was the universe, Luke thought. How beautifully flowing, glorious and aglow, like the robe of a queen. Ice black, clean in its emptiness and solitude. So unlike the motley collage of spinning dust motes men called their worlds, where the human bacteria throve and multiplied and slaughtered one another. Also, that one might say he stood a little higher than his fellows. In depressed moments, he felt sure there was no really happy living matter on any of those worlds. Only a plethora of destructive human diseases which fought and raged constantly against one another. A sequence of cancerous civilizations which fed on its own body, never healing, yet somehow not quite dying. A particularly virulent I sometimes get tongue tied, so bear with me on that. A particularly virulent. I got the word right earlier. A particularly virulent, there we go, strain of one of those cancers had killed his own mother and father, then his Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen. It had also taken from him the man that he had learned to respect more than any other, the elderly Jedi Knight, Ben Kenobi. Although he had seen Kenobi struck by the lightsaber of Darth Vader on board the now obliterated Death Star battle station, he could not be certain the old wizard was truly dead. Vader's saber had left only empty air in its wake. That Ben Kenobi had departed this plane of existence was unarguable. What no one could tell was what level of existence he had passed into. Maybe death, and maybe not. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop right there, and I'm going to jump in with some quick commentary. Again, this book came out in 1978, 2 years before Empire Strikes Back, where, of course, we do know that Obi-Wan does indeed make future appearances after his physical death as a Force ghost. Excuse me. So it's interesting to see that the idea of Force ghosts were already rattling around in George Lucas's head. Well, I guess it's not that interesting because we do hear Ben talking to Luke even in A New Hope, use the Force, Luke, as he's going down the trench. But that it's mentioned here and that Luke isn't sure that Ben's truly dead is still interesting to me. Continuing on. There were times when Luke experienced an agreeably crawly sensation, as if someone were lurking just behind him. That unseen presence occasionally seemed to move arms and legs for him, or to supply suggestions and thoughts when his own mind was helplessly blank. Blank as that of the former farm boy on Tatooine's desert world. Unseen spirits or not, Luke reflected grimly. If there was one thing he was sure of, it was that the callow youth he once been was dead and dry as dust. In the Rebel Alliance of Worlds, struggling against the corrupt rule of the Imperial government, he held no formal title, but no one taunted him or called him farm boy, not since he helped destroy the bloated battle station secretly built by Governor Moff Tarkin and his henchman, Darth Vader. That's, a, that's another interesting detail there. They're presenting Moff as if that was Tarkin's first name, whereas we know now that Moff is a title held by different Imperial officers that are in charge of like multiple systems at once. So it's interesting to see a different connotation to that word. Luke had no experience with titles, hence no use for them. When the rebel leaders offered him any reward within their ability to grant, he asked only to be permitted to continue piloting a fighter in the Alliance's services. Some thought his request unduly modest, but one shrewd general disagreed, explaining how Luke might be more valuable to the rebellion without a title or commission, which, the veteran pointed out to his colleagues, would serve only to make the youth a prime target for Imperial assassination. So Luke remained the pilot he always wanted to be, perfecting his flying skills and all unceasingly wrestling with the force Ben Kenobi had enabled him to begin to understand. No time for meditating now, he reminded himself, as he studied the instruments of his X-Wing fighter. A glance forward showed the brilliant, pulsing sunball of Cercarpus Major. If I'm not sure how to pronounce something, I will give it my best shot. Its devastating radiance stopped down to viewable intensity by the phototropic material of the transparent port itself. Everything okay back there, R2? He called into his pickup. A cheerful beep from the stubby little droid locked in position behind the cockpit assured Luke that it was. Their destination was the fourth planet out from this star. Like so many others, the Circarposians were appalled by the atrocities perpetuated by the Empire, but too paralyzed by fear to openly join the Rebel Alliance. Over the years, a burgeoning underground movement had arisen on Circarpus, an underground needing only enough aid and encouragement from the Alliance to rise and swing their world to the cause of freedom. From the tiny hidden rebel station on the outermost planet of the system, Luke and the princess were racing to a critically important meeting with the heads of that underground to offer the necessary promise of support. He checked his console chronometer. They would arrive in plenty of time to reassure the highly nervous underground chiefs. Leaning slightly forward and glancing to starboard, he could admire the sleek Y-wing fighter cruising alongside. Two figures sat silhouetted by instrument lights within its cockpit. One was the gleaming golden shape of C-3PO, R2's droid companion. And I just want to point out, just as a funny note here, they don't spell him with numbers. It is literally spelled Seethrepio, whereas everything else is literally the letter C, the number 3, PO. Just something funny there. The other, whenever he looked at her, the other caused emotions to boil within him like soup too long on the fire. No matter if she was separated from him by near vacuum as at present, or by only an arm's length in a conference room. It was for and because of that individual, princess and senator, Leia Organa of the now vaporized world of Alderaan, that Luke become involved with the rebellion. First her portrait, and then her person had initiated the irreversible metamorphosis from farm boy to fighter pilot. Now the two of them were the official emissaries from the ruling council to the rebel government to the vacillating underground on Sercarpus. Sending her on so dangerous a mission, Luke had thought from the first was a risk, but a second system was ready to commit itself to the alliance if it was announced that Sercarpus had also joined. At the same time, if that second system would declare its defiance to the Empire, then the Circarposian underground would undoubtedly come over to the side of the rebellion. So not one, but two systems waited on the outcome of this mission. And if it failed, Luke knew both systems would probably lose heart and withhold their desperately needing aid. They had to succeed. Luke had no doubts as he silently adjusted his ship's attitude a quarter of a degree to the plane of the solar ecliptic about the outcome of their mission. He couldn't imagine anyone who could not be persuaded by Princess Leia. She could convince him of anything. Luke remembered those moments when she forgot her station and title. He dreamed of a time she might forget them forever. Again, this came out before Empire Strikes Back, for sure before Return of the Jedi. So the notion that Luke was Leia's sister was never even thought of by this point. A beat from behind woke Luke from his daydreaming, wiped the smile from his face. They were preparing to pass close by Sir Carpus 5, and R2 was reminding him of it. A vast cloud-shrouded globe. The planet was listed in Luke's library as being mostly unexplored, save for a single early Imperial scouting expedition. Hold on a second. According to the computer readout, it was also known to the Circarposians as Mimbon. That sounds familiar for some reason. Those that are knowledgeable about Star Wars that are listening right now, where else have we heard the name Mimbon as far as a planet goes? According to the computer readout, it was also known to the Circarposians as Mimbon, and his intership communicator dinged for attention. I'm receiving you, Princess. Her reply was filled with irritation. My port engine is beginning to generate unequal radiation pulses. Even when bothered, to him that voice was as naturally sweet and pleasing as sugar-laden fruit. How bad, he inquired, frowning worriedly. Bad enough, Luke. The words sounded strained. I'm losing control already, and the inequality is getting worse. I don't think I'm going to be able to compensate. We'll have to stop at the first base down below on Mimbon and have the problem corrected. Luke opened his mouth to reply, did so after hesitating briefly. You can't possibly make it safely to Sercarpus 4. Oh, that was question. You can't possibly make it safely to Sercarpus 4? I don't think so, Luke. I might make near orbit, but then we'd have to deal with official repair systems and couldn't set down as planned. We'd miss the meeting, and we can't miss it. Resistance groups from all over the Sercarpus system are going to be there. If I don't arrive, they'll panic. We'll have one stang of a time getting them to surface again, and the Sercarpus worlds are vital to the rebellion, Luke. I still don't think, he began. Don't make me make it an order, Luke. Biting back his initial response, he hurriedly began a check of visual readouts, charts, and records. According to my information tapes, Mimbon doesn't have a repair station, Leia. In fact, he added with a glance at the murky green-white sphere below and to one side, Mimbon might not even have an emergency standby station. It doesn't matter, Luke. I have to make the conference, and I'm going down while I still have some real control. Surely, in a system as populous as this one, any world with a breathable atmosphere is going to be equipped with facilities for emergency repair. Your data must be old, or else you're searching the wrong tapes. Pause, then. You can prove it by shifting your communicator monitor to frequency 0461. Luke adjusted the requisite controls. Instantly, a steady whine filled the small cabin. Real quick, I want to say hello to Jason Fox of 540 Studios. He says, we've heard about it since Tales of the Jedi audio drama, The Old Republic, Fatal Alliance, and more. And Splinter of the Mind's Eye was the first appearance of Mimban. Okay. Thank you for filling that in for me. And also, it's good to have you here, man. Let me chew up this cough drop real quick, and I'll keep going. I'm still not completely clear of a sore throat, so that's why I might sound a little bit scratchy. All right, back into it. That's a directional landing beacon, all right, he replied, confused. Several further queries, however, revealed no records of a station on Mimban. But there's still nothing in the listings on either Imperial or Alliance tapes. He broke off as a puff of gas glowed brightly from the princess's Y-wing, expanded brightly and vanished. Leia! Princess Leia! Her small ship was already curving away from him. Lost lateral controls completely now, Luke. I've got to go down. Luke rushed to match her glide path. I don't deny the presence of the beacon. Maybe we'll be lucky. Try to shift power to your port controls. I'm doing the best I can. A brief silence followed by, stop moving around, 3PO, and watch your ventral manipulators. A contrite metallic, sorry, Princess Leia, sounded from her cabin companion, the bronze human cyborg relations droid C-3PO. But what if Master Luke is correct and there's no station below? We could find ourselves marooned forever on this empty world, without companionship, without knowledge tapes, without lubricants. Oh man, of course C-3PO would be concerned about keeping his joints lubricated. I think the new Jedi Order Force Heretic 1 Remnant was the last time we did hear about it. Okay. Also, by the way, I do want to jump in real quick while I'm taking a quick breather, getting a drink of water, and say that that we're not just going to be limited to Star Wars books, even though I do have plenty of those on tap here. We're not just going to be limited to Star Wars books with this series of Paul's bedtime stories. Anything is fair game. Like on hand with me, I've got a Star Trek book. I've got Dune, but that one's going to take forever. I'd like to revisit some old classic ones that I've got, like the Chronicles of Narnia stuff. I've got the entire Harry Potter franchise, and of course, I'll take requests. So, any story I'm willing to read on here. We're not just limited to Star Wars. Back to what I was saying. You heard the beacon, didn't you? Luke saw a small explosion, whereupon the Y-wing dove surfaceward at an abruptly sharper angle. For a few moments, only static answered his frantic calls. Then the interference cleared. Close, Luke. I lost my starboard dorsal engine completely. Excuse me. I cut port dorsal 90% to balance guidance systems. I know. I've cut power to slow with you. In the Y-wing's tiny cabin, 3PO sighed, gripped the walls around him more firmly. Try to set us down more gently, please, Princess. Rough landings do terrible things to my internal gyros. Hello to Daryl the Derelict, who says, I want to hear the story about the man from Nantucket. I'm afraid I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm sure you'll tell me, though. You're not so good on my insides either, the princess shot back, lips clenched tightly as she fought the sluggish controls. Besides, you've nothing to worry about. Droids can't get space sick. That is a good point. 3PO could have argued otherwise, but remained silent as the Y Wing commenced a stomach turning roll down. Luke had to react rapidly to follow. There was one tiny positive sign. The beacon signal was not imaginary. It was really there, beeping steadily when he adjusted the controls on his board so that the signal was audible. Maybe Leia was right, but he still didn't feel confident. R2, let me know if you spot anything usual on our way down. Keep all your sensory plugins on full power. A reassuring whisper from the cockpits. On. It's a dirty limerick. And yes, Daryl, I am reading Splinter of the Mind's Eye. We're trying something new tonight because I've never seen anyone do a live book reading on YouTube before, or at least not an entire stream solely based around that. And so I wanted to give it a try and see how it goes. They were at 200 kilometers and descending when Luke jumped in his seat. Something began to push at his mind, a stirring in the force. He tried to relax, to let it fill and flow over and through him just as old Ben had instructed him. His sensitivity was far from perfectly attuned, and he sincerely doubted he would ever attain half the command of the Force that Kenobi had possessed, which is kind of funny because, at least in the old EU, Luke ended up being the single most powerful Jedi ever. Though the old man had expressed great confidence in Luke's potential, still, he knew enough to categorize that subtle tingling. It sparked an almost palpable feeling of unease in him, and it came from something, or several somethings, on the surface below. Yet he wasn't sure. Not that he could do anything about it now. The only concern of the moment was hoping the princess's ship could set down safely. But the sooner they left Mimban, the better he'd feel. Despite her own problems, the princess was taking time to relay coordinate information to him, as if he couldn't plot her own course by himself. Instead, he tried to identify something he'd just spotted below them as they entered the outer atmosphere. Something funny in the clouds here, he couldn't decide just what. He voiced his new concern to the princess. Luke, you're worrying too much. You'll worry yourself to death at an early age. I'm going to steal that line. You'll worry yourself to death at an early age. And that would be a waste of. He never did find out what worrying himself to death would be a waste of, because at that moment they entered the troposphere for the first time. And the immediate reaction of both ships to the thicker air and air to ships was anything but normal. The thicker air and air to ships. Is that a typo? Oh well. It seemed as if they suddenly plunged from a cloud-dotted but unexceptional appearing sky into an ocean of the liquid electricity. Gigantic multicolored bolts of energy erupted from empty air, contacted the hulls of the two ships, and fomented instrumental chaos where order had reigned seconds before. Yeah, that's what we're talking about right now, Daryl, the planet Mimban. Excuse me. I might have to do a shot of cough syrup. Instead of the blue or yellow tinged canopy they expected to sail through, the atmosphere all around them was drenched with bizarre, preambulating energy so wild and frenzied they bordered on the animate. Behind Luke, R2D2 beeped nervously. Luke fought his own instrumentation. It flaunted a farrago of electronic nonsense at him. Excuse me. The madly bucking X-Wing was held in the grip of unidentified forces powerful enough to toss it about like a plaything. The chromatic storm vanished behind him as if he'd suddenly emerged from a waterspout, but his controls continued to exhibit what were probably permanent manifestations of the electronically addled. A quick verbal survey revealed what he most feared. The princess's fighter was nowhere in sight. Trying to control his drunken ship in one hand. Drunken ship, that's funny. Trying to control his drunken ship with one hand on the manual controls, Luke activated the communicator with the other. Leia, are you? No! Control, Luke. came the static sprinkled reply. He could barely make out the words. Instruments Raplanza. I'm trying to get down in one piece. If we I do like to do sound effects too. Gone. No matter how frantically he cajoled the communicator, his attention was diverted as something in one overhead panel blew out in shower of sparks and metal fragments, the cockpit filled with acrid fumes. Impelled by a desperate thought, Luke activated the fighter's tracker. Part of the little ship's offensive armament, it was among its best built and sealed components. Even so, it had been overloaded by the fury of the peculiar distorting energies which its designers had never anticipated that it would encounter. Useless now, nonetheless, its automatic record was intact and playable. It showed for several moments the falling spiral which could only have been left by the princess's ship. As best as he could without auto enhancement, Luke set the X-Wing on a pursuit course downward. There was little to no chance of following the princess precisely. He simply prayed that now they might land somewhere other than on opposite sides of the planet from each other. He simply prayed they might land. Swerving slightly, like a crippled camel in a sandstorm, the fighter continued to drop. As the lush surface of Mimban rushed up at him, Luke caught rolling, twisting glimpses of mountainless green swaths interwoven with veins and arteries of muddy brown and blue. Though he was utterly ignorant of Mimbanian topography, the green and blue brown of rivers and streams and vegetation seemed infinitely preferable as landing sites to, say, the endless cerulean of open sea or the gray spires of young mountains. No rock is as soft as water, and no water is as soft as a swamp, he reflected, trying to cheer himself up. He was starting to believe he might actually survive the touchdown, the princess doing likewise. Frantically, he fought to discover a combination of circuits that would reactivate the target tracker. Once he partially succeeded. The screen showed the wiring, still on the course he'd just plotted. His chance of setting down close to her ship was looking better. Despite the demands on his mind, he couldn't help but consider the energy distortions that had ruined their instrumentation. The fact that the Rainbow Maelstrom was confined to one area, an area very close to the location of the landing beacon, raised questions as intriguing as they were disturbing. Trying to minimize the effects on his insane controls, Luke switched off his engines and continued down on glide. Back on Tatooine, he had plenty of practice idling in his Skyhopper, but that was considerably different from doing practically the same thing in a vehicle as complex as his fighter. He had no idea if the same thought would occur to the princess, or if she had any experience in powerless flight. Anxiously chewing his lower lip, Luke realized that even if she tried gliding, his own craft was far better suited to such a maneuver than her Y-wing. That's another thing too that I've noticed. We're operating on the story's pretty much telling us that it's Princess Leia that is piloting this Y-wing. And I've that I can think of, we've only seen the only ship that we've ever seen her pilot in the original trilogy was the Falcon. And of course, those times she had help from either Chewie in A New Hope or Lando in Empire Strikes Back. So it's interesting to see that she is pretty much piloting a Y-wing, I want to say on her own, but she's got 3PO with her, which, yeah, I'm sure he's got some skill as at least a co-pilot, but I don't know. It's just a very interesting visual image to me for Leia to be in the cockpit of a fighter like that. Usually she's riding passenger in another ship or she's helping pilot the Falcon. Continuing on. If only he could see her, he'd feel a lot better. Strain his eyes as he might, though, there was no sign of her. Soon he knew all chance of visual contact would vanish. His ship began plunging recklessly into a floor of dirty gray cotton, thick cumulonimbus clouds. Several rambling flashes crackled through the air, only this time the lightning was natural. But Luke was deep in clouds by then and could see nothing. Panic hammered at him. If the visibility stayed like this all the way to the surface, he'd locate the ground a bit too late, the hard way. As he considered switching back to auto, distorted as it was, he broke out of the bottom layer of clouds. The air was thick with rain, but not so bad that he failed to make out the terrain below. Time was running out faster than altitude now. He had barely enough of either to pull back on the atmospheric controls before something jolted the fighter from below. That was followed instantly by a series of similar crackings as he clipped off the crowns of the tallest trees. Eyeballing his airspeed indicator, Luke fired braking rockets and nudged the ship's nose down ever so gently. At least he would be spared the worry of igniting the vegetation around the landing site. Everything hereabouts was drenched. Again he fired the braking rockets. A series of violent jolts and jounces. That's a new one. Never heard the word jounces before. Shook him despite his battle hardness. A green floral wave crested ahead and overwhelmed him with darkness. He blinked. Ahead, the shattered foreport of the fighter framed jungle with crystal geometry. All was quiet. As he tried to lean forward, water caressed his face. That helped to clear his mind and bring the scenery into sharp focus. Even the rain was falling with caution, he mused. That were indeed a light rain instead of an exceptionally heavy mist. Craning his neck, Luke noted that the metal overhead had been peeled back neatly, as if by some giant opener, by the thick, now cracked limb of an enormous tree. If by chance the fighter had slid in here slightly higher, Luke's skull would have been peeled off just as neatly. Yeah, that's a disturbing thought. A bit more support, and the broad bole of the tree would have smacked him back into the power plants. He had escaped decapitation and fatal compression by a meter either way. Water continued to drip into the broken, open cockpit from the wood above. Luke suddenly realized he was parched and opened his mouth to let the water quench his first thirst. He noticed a slight saltiness that didn't seem right. The rain or mist water looked clear and pure. It was. The saltiness, he realized, came from the blood trickling down from the gash in his forehead. It ran down the left side of his nose and onto his lips. Undoing the G-locks, Luke slipped free of the harness. Even moving slowly and carefully, he felt as if every muscle in his body, having grabbed and pulled from opposite ends to the near breaking point. Ignoring the pain as best he could, he inventoried his surroundings. And hello in the chat to DJ Ronnie G. Thanks for joining. I hope you're wearing a white t-shirt today. And Daryl says, be back soon, going to get a blizzard. I am going to step away also and just real quick blow my nose. Be right back. All right, I'm back. So let's pick up where we left off. Quick drink. And I think I am going to go ahead and take some cough syrup just in case. All right. All right, back into it. Where did we stop? Okay, here we are. Between the distortions generated by the electronic storm he'd passed through and the more prosaic results of the crash, his instruments had become candidates for the second-hand shop. They would never operate this fighter again. Turning to his left, he keyed the exit panel but was not surprised when it failed to respond. After throwing the double switch on the manual release, he jabbed the emergency stud. Two of the four explosive bolts fired. The panel moved a few centimeters, then froze. Pressing himself back into the pilot's seat, Luke braced himself with both hands and kicked. He accomplished nothing. That accomplished nothing save to send shooting pains up both legs. All that remained was the standard exit if it hadn't been too badly jammed. Reaching up with both hands, he shoved the release mechanism, then pushed. Nothing. He paused, panting as he considered his alternatives. Then the cockpit hood began to lift by itself. Squirming frantically, Luke tried to find his pistol. A querulous beep reassured him. Yet R2D2, a curved metallic hood, looked down at him, the single red electronic eye studying him anxiously. Yes, I'm okay, I think. Using R2's center leg as a brace, Luke pulled himself up and out. Clearing his legs, he got to his feet and found himself standing on top of the grounded X-Wing. He rested his back against the curve of the great overhanging branch. A mournful whistle honk sounded, and he glanced down at R2, who clung securely to the little hole nearby. I don't know what you're saying, R2, without 3PO to translate for us, but I can guess. His gaze turned outward. I don't know where he and the princess are. I'm not even sure where we are. Slowly he took stock of the surface of Mimbon. Dense growth rose all around, but it was clumped in large pockets instead of presenting a continuous front like a normal jungle. There was ample open space. Mimbon, or at least the section where he'd come down, was part swamp, part jungle, part bog. I wonder what that sounds like. I wonder if this description of Mimbon might have also influenced the way George ultimately decided to make Dagobah look. Like maybe he had the idea here. It's like, it's a broad galaxy. I'm sure there's more than one swamp planet out there, so why not have both Mimbon and Dagobah? It's plausible. Fluid mud filled most of a language stream to the right of the ship. It meandered in slow motion. To his left, the trunk of the enormous tree he nearly hit towered in the mist. Beyond lay a tangle of other tall growths fringed with bushes and tired, drooping ferns. Gray-brown ground bordered it. There's no way to tell from a distance how solid the surface was. Bracing himself with a hand on a small branch, Luke leaned over the side of the ship. The X-Wing appeared to be resting on similar terrain. It wasn't sinking. That meant he might be able to walk. This was some comfort to him, since without a ship he was a rotten flyer. Smiling slightly to himself, he crouched and peered under the limb. The double wing on the port side of the ship had been snapped off cleanly somewhere back in the forest. Excuse me, leaving only twin metal stubs. Both engines on that side naturally were also missing. Unequivocally, he was grounded. Carefully crawling back to the ruined cockpit, he unlocked the seat and shifted it to one side, then began rummaging in the seat compartment behind it for the material he'd had to carry in with him: emergency rations, his father's lightsaber, a thermal suit, the last because despite the tropic appearance of some of the vegetation, it was decidedly cool outside. Luke knew, excuse me, that there were temperate rainforests as well as tropical ones. While the temperature will probably not become dangerously cold, it could still combine with the omnipresent moisture to give him an uncomfortable and potentially debilitating chill, which I relate to that, by the way, because where I work inside the caverns, all year round, 54 degrees Fahrenheit plus an 87% humidity. That might not sound like a recipe for cool feeling weather, but yeah, the longer you're down there, especially in the deeper sections, because heat rises, you do get chilly. Let's see, back to what we were doing. So he took the precaution of packing the thin suit. The survival pack for his back was strapped to the backside of the seat. Unbuckling it, he began to fill its copious interior with supplies from the compartment. When the rip-proof sack was stuffed, he tried to seal the cockpit as best he could to protect it. Then he sat on the edge of the seat and thought. His preliminary observations had revealed no sign of the princess's Y-wing, yet the damp, foggy air, it could have touched down 10 meters away and still be effectively invisible. She probably had landed or crashed slightly ahead of him, according to his estimate of how rapidly he had set his own ship down. Lacking any other information, he had no choice but to continue on foot along his last plotted course for her. It had occurred to him to stand on the nose of the ship and shout, but he decided it would be better to locate the ship visually first. The cacophony of cries, hoots, howls, whistles, and buzzings which seeped out of the encircling bog and thick vegetation didn't encourage him to make himself conspicuous. Shouting might attract all sorts of attention, some of it possibly carnivorous. Better to find the princess's ship first. With any luck, she would be seated sensibly in the cockpit, alive and intact, and fuming with impatience as she waited for him to arrive. Pulling himself clear of the cockpit again, Luke used branches for balance as he climbed down to the broken stub of the port double wing. He lowered himself carefully to the ground, which was soft, almost springy. Pulling up one foot, he saw that his boot sole was already coated with sticky gray gook. Yes, that word is actually in here. That resembled wet mob clay. But the ground held supported him. R2 joined him a moment later. Thanks to the abruptness of his forced landing, he didn't have to search for a walking stick. There was an abundance of shattered, splintered limbs strewn in the fighter's wake. He selected one which would serve both for support and for testing the ground ahead. Using the nose of the ship as a crude guide, he set his TRACOMP, TRACOMP, I'm going to guess how you say it, and they started off, angling a few degrees to starboard. It might have been a movement of bush branches in the forest. It might have been the Force, or it might have been an old-fashioned hunch. But even Ben Kenobi admitted that Luke only had one chance of finding the princess's ship. If it didn't lie close along the path he was taking, if he missed it and passed on, he could continue trotting the surface of Mimban for 1,000 years without ever seeing her again. If his original plotting tape had been accurate, and if she hadn't altered her course of descent at the last moment for some strange reason, he ought to find her within a week. Of course, he considered she might have been able to prevent her fighter from changing its angle of fall. He shunted that possibility aside. The situation was grim enough without such speculations. The fog mist rain altered its consistency but never dried up completely. So it wasn't long before the exposed portions of his body were thoroughly soaked. At present, he thought it was more of a belligerent fog than a real rain. His suit kept his body moisture free, but face, hands, and scalp soon had rivulets of their own as water accumulated. They were rare, almost clear, dry movements, but he still spent a lot of energy regularly wiping the accumulated water beads from his forehead and cheeks. Once he saw something that looked like a 4-meter long pale snake slither off into the underbrush at his approach. As he strode cautiously over the path it had taken, he saw that it had left a grooved track lined with luminous mucus in the soft earth. But Luke wasn't impressed. He had spent little time in zoological study, even, excuse me, even on Tatooine, which, harbored its own protoplasmic, interesting word, freaks. Such things hadn't interested him much. If a critter didn't try to eat you, claw you, or otherwise ingest you, there were other things to absorb one's interest. Nonetheless, he now had to direct all his attention to keeping his predetermined path. Despite the trachom built into his suit sleeve, he knew he could easily lose his way. A deviation of a tenth of a degree could be critical. He mounted a slight rise during one of the rare, almost clear periods. Through the fog and mist, he glimpsed monolithic gray battlements off in the distance. It seemed likely to him that those walls had not been raised by human hands. Their uniform steel gray color made them look as if they'd been constructed of a child's toy blocks. Luke couldn't be sure this far away whether their color was true or distorted by the shifting fog. Soaring gray towers were inlaid with black stone or metal and boasted misshapen domes. He paused, tempted for the first time to change direction and explore. There were discoveries to be made here. However, the princess waited not in that eldritch city, but somewhere further on, an environment which at any moment might prove hostile. As if in response to his thought, he noticed the stirring in a clump of rust-green bushes ahead. Straining every sense, he dropped to one knee and removed the lightsaber from its place at his wrist. The vegetation began to rustle violently. His thumb slid over the activation stud. R2 beeped nervously alongside. Whatever was in there was moving toward him. He thought about testing the wind, remembered sheepishly there wasn't any. That, however, might not prove an inhibition to the creature approaching him. Quite abruptly, the greenery ahead parted. Out walked the Membanite. It was a large, dark brown, furry ball, with patches and stripes of green covering its body, roughly a meter in diameter. 4 short, furry legs supported it, ending in thick double digits. 4 arms poked clear of the upper surface. The modest tail was naked like a rat's. 2 eyes, peering out from among the bristly fur, were all that showed of a face. They grew wider as they settled on Luke and R2D2. Luke waited tensely, finger poised over the lightsaber switch. The creature did not charge. Instead, it produced a startled, muffled squeal and whirled. With all 8 limbs propelling it, the creature shot back into the protective bush. After several minutes of silence, Luke rose. His fingers slid clear of the saber stud, and he reattached the weapon to his belt, smiling somewhat hysterically. His first confrontation with an inhabitant of this world had sent fleeing in terror from him. Maybe the wildlife hereabouts, if not actually benign, was something less than dangerous. With that in mind, he continued on, his stride a bit longer, a touch more self-assured. His posture was straighter, and his spirits considerably higher, raised up by that stoutest of boys, false confidence. All right, so that's the end of chapter 1, and I said it already, but I'm gonna go ahead and reiterate it. That landing section reminded me a lot of Luke and R2 together on Dagobah, where they're just in this foreign, thick, hard to traverse swampland of a planet. And Luke basically crash lands, although in this version, his X Wing ends up way worse. And it's literally just Luke and R2 relying on each other to survive. Although R2, well, it's mostly been just Luke's observations about the planet for most of this chapter. Mimban, like I said, does remind me a lot of how Dagobah was ultimately portrayed. And again, I think it's very interesting that Leia was flying a Y Wing pretty much by herself, if you don't count C3PO in there with her. Now, the whatever that was that initially caused their ship to go crazy like that's interesting. I don't know whether or not that was a nebula or whether that was something more unnatural, but I'm sure we're going to hear more about that very soon. And I already got a sneak peek too of the second chapter, which is going to be from Leia's point of view. So, as much as I would like to keep going, we are going to go ahead and stop here for the night. So let me get a bookmark, and we will end it here. I think overall, this we're definitely going to keep doing this. In fact, we're going to do this again on Sunday. Sunday evening is going to be another Paul's bedtime story. I'm going to devote to one at least one Paul's bedtime stories stream a week. Probably going to be on Thursdays. We will see what happens. And in the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what other types of books you'd like to see me read as time goes on. Keep in mind where we won't switch around books until after we finish one book. Like, I'm not going to read just that chapter, then immediately go to Dune. So once I'm finished with this book, where would you like me to go next? So with that, thanks for watching. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And we will talk to you later and the Forces family.